appreciating language acquisition. So the concept of language acquisition. Language acquisition is a process through which humans develop the use of a specific language variant. Typically begins in infancy and then continues throughout one's normal life. That's normal circumstances when one is born into a particular speech community and has interaction with one's parents, family, and the broader community itself. The process has universal stages for humans that's independent of any one particular speech community and begins before 5 years of age. In fact, up to 5 years of age is considered a critical period that can be impacted if language development is interrupted. Abnormal circumstances, if you will. And generally, when we're talking about language acquisition, we're talking about a process that does not involve formal learning. Past language acquisition wasn't understood well, and we could say that the development of language was understood through a behavioralist model. In the behavioralist model, language is a kind of response to a stimulus that comes from without the individual human child. But as we understand language acquisition today, it's far more active and creative for it to be simply a stimulus and response. In fact, as we understand human biology and neuroanatomy, we see that the acquisition of language reflects a kind of innateness of the language capacity for our species. So let's think about the stages of language acquisition. We can think about a number of fairly clear stages from 0 to 3 years of age. There's a pre-linguistic stage that's from birth to about 12 months. And in the pre-linguistic stage, children will coo, and that means they will use the vowels of a whole range of different human languages, and they will babble. And when they are babbling, they're using a large range of the consonants of human languages. And so at this point, you can see the kind of biology of language, the innate capacity of humans to produce the languages that make up, or to produce the sounds that make up all of the human languages of the world. And through these stages, a child will begin to hone in, right, on the particular vowels and consonants and other linguistic features of the speech community of which they're a part. So after pre-linguistic stage, from 12 to 18 months, we have a one-word or holophrastic stage. In this period, it's very interesting because children will use one word for a number of different ideas and concepts. We talk about children overextending a word to include items that it doesn't necessarily include. So, for example, milk for I want milk. They'll use the one word to really refer to something much bigger than adult speakers, proficient speakers would use that term. We see terms being underextended. That is, they're used for a smaller range of items than they would normally. So let's say the child is familiar with the term dog. They may only use that to refer to their dog, but not all dogs in general. This is really characteristic of the one-word holophrastic stage. From 18 to 24 months, we see two-word stage, where the child begins to combine two words to form simple phrases, such as daddy, go. And then finally, a telegraphic stage, which can be sentences up to 3 words, but they lack various different grammatical features of adult language. So me want cookie. Here, lacking a pronoun term, I, a grammatical marker for the speaker. We don't see that in the telegraphic stage. We see a simple use of common nouns and common verbs used without grammatical-like language. Let's say prepositions, of, the, and so on. In the second part, from 3 to 5 years, the stages are not as clear. It's a period really of rapid language development, and the vocabulary of the child really begins to grow and expand. you begin to see the utilization of those grammatical elements that I was just talking about. The child, in the absence of any kind of teaching, begins to identify grammatical, syntactic patterns, and they begin to follow the syntactic patterns of their speech community. You begin to see the expansion of language usage above a sentence level, what are sometimes called pragmatic features. We begin to see narrative or storytelling, the use of a series of sentences that reflects a movement in time. We begin to see conversational turn-taking, alternating speakers, the withholding of language until a speaker is finished, and so on. We begin to see this. We begin to see repair when we are aware that someone has not understood what we've said, and then we modify and clarify what we've said or spoken. These are features that develop from 3 to 5 years. And then we have the second language acquisition. During 3 to 5 years, you begin to have true bilingual or multilingual development. So the acquisition of grammar or syntax is quite important. It is what is distinctive about human language use in contrast or comparison, let's say, with our close primate relative. Never been able to observe is the use of grammar. And so grammar is considered to be quite unique to us as a species. The linguist Noam Chomsky has argued that through a theory called parameters, that there are innate rules, that syntax and grammar is innate to humans, but it's not completely fixed. The particular grammatical rules or the particular syntactic rules of the speech community set the parameters within human neuroanatomy. So one of the analogies that he's used is like neuroanatomical switches, that as the child is exposed to a particular language variety, a particular syntax or grammar, those switches get set, and then the child knows to use a particular, let's say, word order of subject, verb, object, or verb, subject, object, or object, verb, subject. Beyond simple language location-specific areas like Broca's area or Wernicke's area, likely something that's coming out of the interaction of various parts of human neuroanatomy that is a kind of capacity to be able to switch from ability to use any particular grammar to using a specific type of grammar. So each human brain then has that universal blueprint, but is able to, within it, to adjust the parameters right for a specific language grammar. Child second language acquisition in multilingual environments is really, really important. More than half of the human species is proficient in more than one language variety. And so beyond language acquisition, an important part of research in anthropology is child second language acquisition in a complex multi or bilingual environment. And right now there are theories of unitary and separate systems of development, that is, in the stages that we've talked about before 3 years of age, that the theory of unitary system will be that the child will, from developing all consonants and all vowels of human languages at the single word stage, will begin to use words of both languages, or if it's a multilingual environment, of 3 languages. Depending on the particular context or setting, if more than one language is used in the household, let's say, then yes, this theory is adequate to explain some of the observational data. But some multilingual environments, the household itself will only have one language, but the child will be exposed to a second or third language in the broader community outside of the house. And so there's also theories of separate systems that, for example, the one word stage of development, a child will only use one of those language. At the 2-word stage, the child will only use the one language for 2-word stage. And once they get past 3 years old, they will then begin to have a new series of stages for the second language. This is a separate system theory of child second language acquisition. There are also similar kinds of ideas about sequential acquisition or simultaneous acquisition. So, of course, simultaneous is allied, right, with the unitary theory of child second language acquisition, that they are simultaneously learning more than one language, and thus seeing that within each of the stages, versus sequential. So the idea that a child develops one language acquisition in the home, and then in kindergarten, right, begins to be exposed and begins to learn or begins to acquire a second language. Thus, we can think about sequential language acquisition in that sense. So these are very similar to the first language acquisition that we talked about in terms of the stages of development, but the process is more variable. And regardless of which of the theories you're kind of reflecting upon, we see more code switching and mixing of languages in a bilingual or multilingual environment. So language acquisition is also important because it really does show both the biological as well as cultural basis of acquisition. You know, as we had said, biology really helps us understand these universal patterns, regardless of any one human population, of how we acquire language. Lots of scholarship on this, from Noam Chomsky, the linguist we've heard about, to Steven Pinker, another important linguist. But the story isn't all about biology, because if language was only biological, then the process would be fixed and would be rote rather than an active and creative process that involves individual human children interacting, right, with a community of speakers. And as we're going to see as we continue on in the class, young speakers of language also change the language as they acquire it. So to kind of conclude here, I've been talking about the language acquisition, trying to understand language as both a biological and cultural phenomena for humans. We've looked at some of the stages of language acquisition and then the necessity really for understanding culture as an aspect of the process.